Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. This whole ordeal has been going on for over 2 years now, and I finally got my resolution last week. It's been a wild ride, so buckle up. Some background. I inherited about 15 acres of beautiful rural property from my grandparents when they passed away 5 years ago. The land has been in our family for generations, and my grandparents were meticulous about teaching me to respect and care for it. I spent summers here as a kid, learning how to identify native plants, maintain the natural stream that runs through the property, and understand the importance of respecting boundaries. I work from home as an environmental consultant, which turned out to be incredibly relevant to this situation. My modest house sits on one side of the property, and the other side borders a newer housing development that went up about 10 years ago. When I first moved in, relations with the neighbors were great. People would wave when they walked by, and a few would stop to chat about the beautiful stream or ask about the wildlife. That all changed when he moved in 2 years ago. From day one, this guy acted like he owned the place. And I don't just mean his own backyard, I mean my land too. At first it was small things. He'd let his kids play near the stream without asking. I didn't mind too much, but a simple conversation would have been nice. Then I noticed he was trimming back branches from my trees that hung near his property line. Again, not the end of the world, but the way he went about it just rubbed me the wrong way. Things came to a head when I noticed he had placed a garden shed that clearly encroached on my property line. I know my land, and I know where the boundaries are. My grandparents had shown me the survey markers years ago. Still, I wanted to be a good neighbor, so I walked over one Saturday morning to have a friendly chat. I knocked on his door and mentioned that I thought his new shed might be over the property line. The look he gave me was one of pure condescension. "That old survey must be wrong," he said with a dismissive wave. "This development was properly mapped when it was built. Besides, you're not using that land anyway." I tried to explain that regardless of whether I was actively using it, it was still my property. His response? "Look, I'm improving the neighborhood here. Your unused space is an eyesore. What are you going to do about it? Nobody cares about property lines this far out anyway." I walked away fuming but determined to handle this properly. I contacted a surveyor friend who agreed to verify the boundary lines. The results confirmed what I already knew, but also showed the encroachment was worse than I thought. Not just the shed, but his recently installed landscaping and fire pit area were both on my land. Armed with the survey results, I went back to speak with him. This time, I brought printed documentation and approached him when he was in his yard one evening. "I've had the property surveyed," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. "It confirms that your shed, some of your landscaping, and the fire pit are actually on my property. I'd appreciate it if you could move them back to your side of the line." That's when things got ugly. He puffed up his chest and started throwing around legal terms. "Ever heard of adverse possession? I've improved this worthless land. You should be thanking me. My attorney says I have every right to use this space." I knew he was using legal terminology incorrectly, but I decided not to argue. I simply reiterated my request that he respect the property line and left a copy of the survey with him. Over the next few weeks, his behavior got worse. He started hosting large backyard parties that spilled onto my property. I'd find beer cans, paper plates, and other trash scattered along my stream the next morning. He removed the small no trespassing signs I had put up. The final straw came when I returned home from a business trip to find he had cut down a beautiful old oak tree on my property. When I confronted him, he simply said it was blocking his view. But nothing prepared me for what I discovered next. While walking my property line one morning, I found construction stakes and spray paint marks on my land. Curious, I asked another neighbor what was happening. "Oh, he's been talking about putting in a pool," she told me. "Showing everyone plans for a big deck and patio area too." That evening I watched as he brought some friends over and they began clearing more of the disputed area, laughing and pointing at various spots as if planning the layout. I overheard him say, "This whole area is going to be transformed." I decided to make one last attempt at a reasonable conversation. I waited until his friends left and approached him. "I understand you're planning to build a pool, but a significant portion of where you're marking is on my property. I can't allow that." He laughed. "Everyone thinks you're being ridiculous. This land was always meant to be part of our development. No one wants to look at your overgrown mess anyway." That was it. I'd had enough. I contacted a lawyer friend who confirmed I had a clear property rights case, but as we talked, I realized there was more at stake than just the property line. The stream that ran through my property was protected by local environmental regulations due to being part of a larger watershed system and home to some protected species. I began documenting everything. I installed wildlife cameras that captured him trespassing, removing my signs, and dumping yard waste near the stream. I filed the updated survey with the county records office and formally registered the historic property boundaries. I also contacted the local environmental agency about potential damage to the protected stream area. Things came to a head when I returned home one day to find an excavator on my property. They had started digging for the pool without permits, and the excavation was dangerously close to the stream, with dirt and debris already washing into the water. I immediately called the authorities. Within hours, officials from the county, the environmental agency, and even representatives from his neighborhood's HOA were on site. The excavation was halted, and the contractor admitted he'd been assured by my neighbor that all permits were in order and the property line was not an issue. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity. The environmental agency levied significant fines against him for watershed damage and disruption of protected habitat. The county issued multiple citations for building without permits and encroaching on private property. His HOA, embarrassed by the situation, sided with me and demanded he remove all structures from my land and restore the damaged areas. In the end, he was required to remove the shed, fire pit, and all landscaping from my property, pay for professional environmental restoration of the damaged stream area, face significant fines from both the county and environmental agency, pay my legal fees, issue a formal apology at an HOA meeting. The financial hit was substantial, but the blow to his ego was even worse. Other neighbors who had believed his claims about the property lines now knew the truth. Several approached me privately to apologize for not speaking up sooner, admitting they'd seen him removing my signs or dumping debris near the stream. I used some of the settlement money to install proper boundary markers and create a small conservation easement along the stream. I also put up educational signs about the watershed and local wildlife, turning what had been a point of contention into something the community could appreciate. The final satisfaction came 6 months later when I noticed a for sale sign in front of his house. A neighbor told me he was selling at a loss due to the HOA violations on his record. The new owners have been lovely, often stopping to chat about the stream and asking permission before their kids go exploring near the water. Looking back, I'm glad I handled things the way my grandparents would have wanted, patiently, legally, and with respect for the land. Standing up to entitled behavior isn't always easy, but protecting what's rightfully yours is always worth it. My grandfather always said, "Good fences make good neighbors, but good neighbors respect fences even when they're not there." The property feels more like home than ever now. The stream is recovering nicely, and I've even started leading occasional nature walks for interested neighbors who want to learn about the ecosystem we share. What my former neighbor saw as worthless and unused land, others now recognize as a valuable natural space worth protecting. Sometimes I wonder if he realizes that if he'd just asked permission in the first place, I probably would have let his kids play near the stream and might have even worked with him on some appropriate landscaping improvements. But his entitlement led to his downfall, and I can't say I feel bad about how things turned out. The best revenge wasn't the legal victory or even watching him move away. It was transforming his attempt to steal my land into an opportunity to build a stronger community connection to this special place that my family has treasured for generations. The next one is an entitled people's story. My wife and I met in college. We were in the same study group for an economics class, and we hit it off immediately. She was smart, funny, and had this infectious laugh that could light up a room. After dating for 3 years, I proposed, and we got married shortly after graduation. Everything was perfect. Until I met her parents. Her father was a successful businessman who owned several car dealerships across the state. Her mother was a socialite who spent most of her time organizing charity events and attending country club functions. They lived in a massive house in an exclusive gated community, and from the moment they laid eyes on me, they made it clear I wasn't good enough for their daughter. I come from a middle-class family. My dad was a high school teacher, and my mom worked as a nurse. We never struggled for necessities, but we weren't wealthy by any means. I worked my way through college, took out loans, and was proud of what I'd accomplished. But to my in-laws, I was just some nobody who had somehow tricked their precious daughter into marrying beneath her station. Our first meeting was a disaster. I'd gone to their house for dinner, dressed in my best suit, armed with a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers. Her mother took one look at the wine, which I'd spent hours researching, and said, "Oh, how quaint. We'll just add this to the cooking supplies." Her father spent the entire dinner grilling me about my family, my career prospects, and my finances. When I told him I was starting a position at a local marketing firm, he scoffed. "Marketing? That's just a fancy word for professional lying. When are you going to get a real job?" he asked, swirling his scotch. "Dad!" my then-girlfriend exclaimed. "That's completely uncalled for." "I'm just asking questions, sweetheart," he replied with a smirk. "Don't you think I have a right to know what kind of man my daughter is dating?" Despite their obvious disapproval, my wife insisted they'd warm up to me eventually. She was wrong. When we announced our engagement 6 months later, her mother burst into tears, and not the happy kind. "But you're so young," she wailed. "You have so much ahead of you." Her father took me aside later that evening. "You know she's going to be inheriting quite a bit of money someday," he said, his voice low and threatening. "If you think you're getting your hands on the family fortune, think again. We'll have the best prenup lawyers in the country, make sure of that." I was insulted but kept my cool. "Sir, I love your daughter for who she is, not what she has. I'd marry her if she didn't have a penny to her name," he snorted. Easy to say when you know she does. Despite their objections, we got married in a beautiful ceremony. Her parents insisted on paying, which I later realized was just their way of maintaining control. They invited over 200 of their closest friends, most of whom neither my wife nor I had ever met. Our small, intimate wedding turned into a social event for her parents to show off. Then the early years. The first year of our marriage was challenging but wonderful. We bought a modest starter home about 30 minutes away from her parents. I was moving up at the marketing firm, and my wife started working as an elementary school teacher. We weren't rich, but we were happy and making a life together. Her parents, however, seemed determined to prove our marriage wouldn't last. They'd call at all hours, often just checking in to see if everything was okay. When my wife mentioned a minor disagreement we'd had over what color to paint the living room, her mother immediately suggested she come home for a few days to clear her head. "Mom, it's just paint," my wife had said, exasperated. "Couples disagree about stuff all the time. It's normal." "Well, if you'd married Bradley Wellington like I suggested, you'd have interior decorators making those decisions for you," her mother replied snippily. Ah, yes, Bradley Wellington III, the one who got away, according to my mother-in-law. He came from a good family, meaning rich, had attended an Ivy League school, and was now a successful surgeon. He was also, from what my wife told me, boring as watching paint dry and had the personality of a wet paper towel. The constant comparisons to Bradley became a running joke between my wife and me. "What would Bradley do?" I'd ask when faced with a clogged toilet or a burned dinner. We'd laugh, but deep down, the constant undermining from her parents was starting to wear on us. Things took a turn for the worse when my wife got pregnant with our first child. Her parents were initially thrilled at the prospect of becoming grandparents, but their joy quickly turned to meddling. They had opinions on everything, from what my wife should eat, to what color we should paint the nursery, to what we should name the baby. "You can't possibly name my grandson after your father," her mother said one day over lunch. "Thomas is such a common name. He needs something distinguished, like Percival or Maximilian." "Mom, we're naming him after my husband's dad," my wife said firmly. "It's important to him, and it's important to me." "Well, I think you're making a mistake," her mother sniffed. "But then again, that seems to be a pattern for you lately." The passive-aggressive comments continued throughout the pregnancy. When we decided not to find out the gender, they were appalled. When we mentioned we were considering cloth diapers, they laughed in our faces. Every decision we made was wrong in their eyes. But the real trouble started after little Thomas was born. The escalation. Having a newborn is hard enough without constant criticism, but my in-laws took it to a new level. They'd show up unannounced, usually when I was at work, to help my wife with the baby. This help consisted of criticizing her breastfeeding technique, rearranging our kitchen without permission, and filling our freezer with pre-prepared meals because they didn't trust my cooking. "Your husband works such long hours," I overheard her mother saying one day as I came home early. "It's like you're practically a single mother. If I'd married Bradley, I'd have died of boredom by now," my wife interrupted. "I love my husband, Mom. Why can't you just accept that?" "Because he's holding you back," her mother exclaimed. "Look at this house. Look at your life. You could have had so much more." I cleared my throat, making my presence known. My mother-in-law had the decency to look embarrassed, but she didn't apologize. The situation got worse when I was passed over for a promotion at work. It was disappointing, but these things happen. My wife was supportive, but her parents acted like it was the end of the world. "See, this is exactly what I was afraid of," her father said when they came over for dinner that weekend. "No ambition, no drive. How are you going to provide for my daughter and grandson?" "Dad, that's enough," my wife said sharply. "This is my husband you're talking about, and I won't have you disrespect him in our home." "I'm just stating facts," he replied with a shrug. "The truth hurts sometimes." What I didn't know then was that while they were undermining me to my face, they were doing much worse behind my back. A few months later, a strange woman approached me in a coffee shop while I was working on a Saturday. She sat down across from me without asking and smiled. "You don't know me," she said, "but I know all about you." She introduced herself as a paralegal at a law firm downtown. Your in-laws came in last week to consult with one of our divorce attorneys. They were asking a lot of questions about child custody, specifically how their daughter could get full custody of their grandson. I was stunned. There must be some mistake. My wife and I aren't getting divorced. That's what was so weird, she continued. They seem to be exploring options without your wife's knowledge. I don't normally do this kind of thing, but it felt wrong. I thought you should know. I thanked her for the information, my mind reeling. Why would my in-laws be talking to divorce attorneys? My wife and I had our disagreements like any couple, but we were solid, weren't we? When I got home, I casually asked my wife if everything was okay between us. She looked confused. Of course, why would you ask that? I hesitated, but decided not to mention what the paralegal had told me. I needed more information before creating unnecessary drama. Just checking, I said with a smile. I love you, you know. She kissed me. I love you too, weirdo. I decided to keep my eyes and ears open. Over the next few weeks, I noticed my wife was having more lunch dates with her mother than usual. She'd come home looking stressed, and when I'd ask what was wrong, she'd say it was nothing. Then one evening, while my wife was bathing our son, her phone pinged with a text message. I'm not proud of this, but I looked. It was from her mother. Have you thought more about what we discussed? Your father and I just want what's best for you and Thomas. You know that man will never provide the life you deserve. My heart sank. They were trying to convince my wife to leave me. The discovery. I didn't confront my wife immediately. Part of me was afraid of what she might say, but I also wanted to understand the full extent of what was happening, so I did something I never thought I would do. I started investigating my in-laws. I began by looking into her father's business. He'd always portrayed himself as a self-made man who built his car dealership empire from nothing. He loved to lecture me about hard work and bootstraps, but using my marketing contacts and some online research, I discovered his first dealership had been purchased with a sizable loan from his father-in-law. Not exactly the rags to riches story he liked to tell. Interesting, but not exactly damning information. I kept digging. I spoke with old family friends of my wife, people who knew her parents before they were wealthy. One elderly woman, a former neighbor, remembered them well. Oh, they weren't always so high and mighty, she told me over tea. They lived in a little ranch house on Elm Street, just like the rest of us. Everything changed when Martha's father died and left them that money. Martha's father? I asked, confused. Martha was my mother-in-law. Yes, old Mr. Harrington. Owned half the real estate in the county. Didn't approve of Martha marrying Robert, your father-in-law, at all. Said he was just after the money. She chuckled. Guess he was right about that. This contradicted the story my in-laws had always told, that Robert had earned every penny through his business acumen and Martha had been born into society. Their entire identity seemed built on this lie. But the real bombshell came when I was going through some old photos with my wife. There was one of her parents on their wedding day. Wait, when was this taken? I asked, looking at the date on the back of the photo. 1985, I think, she replied. And you were born in? 1992. Why? I did some quick math. Your parents were married for 7 years before they had you? She nodded. Yeah, they had trouble conceiving. Mom went through several rounds of fertility treatments. Something didn't add up. I'd met my wife's uncle, her father's brother, and there was a strong family resemblance between them. But looking at photos of her father as a young man, I realized my wife looked nothing like him. She had always said she took after her mother, which was partially true, but there were features, her distinctive green eyes, her dimples, that weren't present in either parent. I started to form a theory. A wild, potentially explosive theory. Using an Ancestry DNA kit I'd received as a gift, but never used, I casually suggested my wife and I both take the test. It would be fun to see our results together, I said. Plus, we can learn about what health conditions we might pass on to Thomas. She agreed, and we sent in our samples. When the results came back, I wasn't surprised to find mine matched what I knew of my family history. But my wife's results were interesting. According to the DNA test, she was only 50% ethnically what we thought she was. Her father's supposed Eastern European ancestry was nowhere to be found. More tellingly, she had several close DNA matches on the site, second and third cousins she'd never heard of, all connected to a man named Bradley Wellington Sr. Bradley, the same name as the man her mother had wanted her to marry. I did more research and discovered that Bradley Wellington III, the guy her parents had tried to push her toward, was the grandson of Bradley Wellington Sr. In other words, my in-laws had been trying to set my wife up with a blood relative. I was stunned. The implications were enormous. If I was right, my father-in-law wasn't my wife's biological father, and they'd been hiding this fact for her entire life. Even worse, they'd been actively trying to set her up with what was essentially her cousin. But I needed more proof before making such an explosive accusation. The confrontation. Armed with my suspicions and preliminary evidence, I decided to confront my in-laws directly. I arranged to meet them for lunch while my wife was at a teacher's conference for the weekend. "We need to talk," I said as soon as we were seated. "I know what you've been doing." "I have no idea what you're talking about," my father-in-law blustered. "You've been trying to break up my marriage," I said calmly. "You've been talking to divorce attorneys, feeding my wife doubts and undermining me at every turn." "We're just looking out for our daughter," her mother said. "She deserves better than what you can give her." "Better like Bradley Wellington?" I asked. They exchanged a look. "Bradley comes from a good family," her mother said stiffly. "He could provide for her in ways you never could." "You mean her cousin could provide for her?" I dropped the bombshell. The color drained from both their faces. "What did you just say?" her father whispered. I laid out my evidence, the DNA test results, the family connections I'd uncovered, the timeline of their marriage versus my wife's birth. "I know that Robert isn't her biological father," I concluded, "and I know that Bradley Wellington Sr. likely is." Her mother burst into tears. Her father looked like he might have a heart attack. "How dare you?" he finally sputtered. "You have no right to dig into our private business." "You made it my business when you tried to destroy my marriage," I replied evenly. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop interfering in our lives. No more undermining me to my wife, no more surprise visits, no more lawyers. You're going to respect our marriage and our parenting decisions, and you're never going to mention Bradley Wellington to my wife again." "And if we don't?" her father challenged, though his voice lacked conviction. "Then I'll tell your daughter everything. The DNA test results, the family connection to Bradley, all of it. Do you think she'll ever forgive you for keeping this from her? For trying to set her up with her own cousin? For lying to her entire life about who she really is?" They were silent, defeated. "One more thing," I added. "You're going to start treating me with respect. Not because you like me, but because I'm your daughter's husband and the father of your grandson. I don't care if you think I'm not good enough. That's your problem, not mine." "Fine," her father finally said. "You've made your point. Have I? Because I want to be very clear. This is your one and only chance. If you ever try to come between me and my wife again, all bets are off." I left them sitting in that restaurant, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. I had no intention of telling my wife what I'd discovered. That would devastate her, and I loved her too much to put her through that pain unnecessarily. But her parents didn't need to know that. The resolution. The change in my in-laws' behavior was immediate and dramatic. Gone were the snide comments about my career, the constant comparisons to Bradley, and the undermining of our parenting decisions. They became respectful, almost deferential during their now less frequent visits. When I got a new job with better pay and prospects a few months later, her father actually congratulated me. "I'm impressed," he said, and I could tell it physically pained him to say it. "You're doing well for yourself." My wife was confused by the sudden shift. "What happened between you and my parents?" she asked one night. "Did you guys have some sort of secret meeting I don't know about?" I smiled. "Let's just say we came to an understanding." "Well, whatever you did, thank you," she said, snuggling into my side. "It's nice not having them criticize every decision we make." Our relationship flourished without the constant interference. We had a second child, a daughter we named after my grandmother. My career continued to advance, and my wife eventually became a school principal. We moved to a larger house in a nice neighborhood, not as fancy as her parents' gated community, but perfect for our family. As for my in-laws, they gradually became more genuine in their interactions with us. I think they realized over time that I truly loved their daughter and was committed to giving her a good life. Not the life they had imagined for her, but a happy one nonetheless. One Christmas Eve, 5 years after our confrontation, my father-in-law pulled me aside while everyone else was singing carols around the piano. "I need to say something to you," he said, his voice gruff. "I was wrong about you. You're a good husband and a good father. I'm sorry for how I treated you." Coming from him, this was equivalent to moving mountains. I nodded, accepting his apology without rubbing it in. "Thank you. That means a lot." "Does she know?" he asked quietly, and I knew exactly what he was referring to. "No," I replied, "and unless you give me reason, she never will. Some secrets are better left buried." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you," he whispered. I rejoined my wife and children, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The secret I carried was a heavy one, but it was worth it to protect my wife from pain and to secure our family's happiness. My in-laws never tried to sabotage our marriage again. In fact, over time, they became genuinely supportive. I never revealed what I knew to my wife, deciding that some truths do more harm than good. What mattered was that our family was strong, our marriage was solid, and our children were growing up surrounded by love. Sometimes the best revenge isn't exposing people's secrets to the world, it's using those secrets to create positive change. My in-laws tried to destroy what was most precious to me, but in the end, I not only saved my marriage, but actually improved our extended family relationships. And that, I think, is the greatest victory of all. The next one is a malicious compliances story, so I got two stories here for y'all, both from the same job and within a month of each other. The story begins with me working at a large grocery store chain as a cart pusher. Day in, day out, I would be outside bringing carts in. That position had the single highest turnover rate in the entire store. We had to bring all the carts in manually without one of those electric pushers. Because I had other duties as well, that is, helping cashiers, we would often be bringing in anywhere from 15 carts a load. Health and safety stated we were not to do more than 5 a load. I was a naive teenager. Plenty of my coworkers developed back problems, and one of the cashiers started giving me painkillers out of pocket so I wouldn't complain. When regional visited, they pulled from other departments to make it look like we were following code. I took the issue to the union rep, but she was a supervisor who didn't care. I took it to my department's manager, and she told me I'm welcome to find a new job. So I did just that. About a year into COVID, I decided enough is enough, and I'm not breaking my back for minimum wage. I put my 2 weeks in the moment I had another job lined up. For those last 2 weeks, I followed health and safety to the letter. 5 carts a load. Suddenly, ever-reliable me was hardly ever in the store. I remember one day towards the end, I get called into the store manager's office for a complaint. One of my coworkers complained that I wasn't pulling my weight and he had to pick up the slack. I told them that I am simply following the safe limit as stated by the guidelines. I could see the steam coming from boss man's ears, but he couldn't do anything. He told other guy that I was right and he would send someone else from a different department to help. That was one of the most satisfying days of that horrid job. The second one happened about a month before, again during peak COVID. We were allowed 1.5 hours of paid leave, during scheduled hours, to get our vaccine shot mandated by the local government. This was when I was already looking for a new job, so I had no real love for the store. I scheduled my shot on the busiest day of the week, just after my half-hour unpaid lunch. As we were instructed, I told my immediate supervisor about it when I walked in. It was the union rep supervisor. No issues. I go for my break around noon, no issues. I come back down to the store floor and get told by the supervisor that carts need to be done urgently. I tell her I can't because I'm getting my vaccine, as we discussed this morning. She asked me why I couldn't do it during my break. A smile shot across my face as I informed her I'm just following the mandate and that she would have to deal with the carts in my stead. She was furious but relented. I got my shot within 20 minutes and spent the rest of my paid leave eating a pizza. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.